Part 2. Adam, when I call you a Judas, it is not because I consider Chris Duane to be the Messiah. Far from it. What I am concerned with is truth and justice, and only truth and justice, which I consider to be synonymous with morality and mental health. It is in the interest of morality and mental health that the original video was posted. It now occurs to me that I left a number of your fallacies, delusions, and contradictions unaddressed, so I will attempt to address them now. In my own defense, in my previous video, I said that nobody is perfect, including myself, and your fallacies and contradictions were so numerous that I can hardly be blamed for missing a few on my first time out. I will, however, apologize for this anyway, as it was unjust of me to leave a portion of your anus intact. 1. You said, quote, Chris tried to pretend that he didn't make any money, unquote. The problem that I have with this claim is that I've been up and down every public communication ever posted by Chris Duane, and I've failed to find even one example where he claimed that he never made any money off of Silver Bullet, Silver Shield. Can you please provide an example? Because in several hours of searching, I was unable to come up with one. I was also unable to find a single SBSS customer who was not aware of the fact that Chris was profiting off these rounds. 2. You have made quite a fuss maligning Chris over $182,000, but you have failed to make one mention of the millions of dollars of business that he brought to Mulligan Men and Rob Gray. Can you please explain to me how you rationalize this worldview? In the first place, I would just like to know what makes you think it's your place to judge anyone else's level of compensation. It seems to contradict your alleged anarcho-capitalism when you argue in favor of price controls. Secondly, you said the fact that customers were not getting their silver delivered for months on end was a, quote, little infraction. This is, of course, a clarion indication of your moral character and the level of respect that you have for Mulligan Mint customers. But how is the $182,000 that allegedly went to Chris Duane a big deal in your mind, when the millions of dollars that Rob Gray failed to deliver is not a big deal in your mind? Please help me understand this contradiction, because it seems like more of the devaluation of Chris Duane and the idealization of Rob Gray that I said in my first video is indicative of a borderline personality disorder. If you are jealous of someone else's success, instead of lashing out in socialist rage, maybe you should spend more time working and less time getting high. Just a thought. 3. You said Rob Gray practices a philosophy of, quote, just walk away and move on. But it seems to me that you and Rob Gray are in fact doing exactly the opposite. From what I can tell, it appears to be Chris who is trying to just walk away and move on, and Rob Gray who is doing everything he can, including committing multiple acts of fraud, to prevent Chris from doing so. 4. I agree with your claim that intellectual property is a fiction. In fact, I would say that intellectual property is an oxymoron, and people who believe in contradictions are schizophrenics. Your point about intellectual property, however, is a straw man and a red herring. In the first place, physical dies are not intellectual property. They're tangible property. In the second place, while Chris may have used the term copyright, his claims have nothing to do with intellectual property and everything to do with the sanctity of the contract that Rob Gray clearly violated. 5. You say that Chris, quote, only gave Rob Gray 5 minutes, unquote. To which I can only reply, was this intended to be a joke? How psychotic are you? Chris Duane and SBSS customers put up with month after month of serial incompetence from Rob Gray and Mulligan Mint before Chris finally asked for a settling of accounts. Chris gave Mulligan Mint the better part of a year to get their act together. How long should he have waited before finally giving up? An entire year? A decade? A century? It seems to me that Chris Duane severing ties and going public is the only reason that orders are now being filled at all. They certainly weren't getting filled before. Honestly, it appears to me that in severing ties with Mulligan Mint, Chris Duane has sacrificed, let me repeat that, sacrificed himself and his reputation to the insipid attacks of nefarious ankle-biters and ne'er-do-wells like Rob Gray and yourself so that customers could finally get their orders filled. How many customers would have gotten their orders filled if Chris didn't raise a red flag? My guess is not many. 6. Let me remind you that when Chris announced he was parting ways with Mulligan Mint, it was April 17th, and we had just witnessed one of the largest price drops in the history of precious metals. How many hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars were lost as Silver Bullet, Silver Shield customers watched the price of silver fall from $35 an ounce to $22, waiting for months on end for their orders to be delivered? Personally, I find it remarkable that Mulligan Mint hasn't been stormed by an army of customers demanding the physical delivery of their silver in the form of a platter carrying Rob Gray's head. Value doesn't just disappear. If it was taken from SPSS customers, it had to be transferred somewhere else. So where did all this money go? If Rob Gray and Mulligan Mint was selling silver at $35 and fulfilling it at $22, obviously there is a huge disparity between what SPSS customers paid at the time their orders were placed and what the price of silver was at the time their orders were delivered months later. As far as I can tell, these massive inequities appear to have been funneled into the purchase of capital equipment for Mulligan Mint, your salary as Rob Gray's media whore lapdog, and Rob Gray's lavish life of leisure. 8. It appears, at least to me, that Rob Gray, Jack Spirko, Adam vs. the Man, and Mulligan Mint are now circling the wagons and attempting to shoot the whistleblower. I noticed that Jack Spirko posted a tour of Mulligan Mint yesterday featuring Rob Gray. I admit, it was nice to see a video from Mulligan Mint that consisted of something other than people standing around with their hands in their pockets talking about, quote, tingling in their nut sacks, unquote, or filling outgoing parcels with packing peanuts one handful at a time. This is the first few inside Mulligan Mint where I've seen anyone move at a pace faster than pond water. Apparently Rob Gray is in what one commenter referred to as, quote, full damage control mode. 9. You criticized Christ and called him a statist for encouraging SPSS customers to use the government legal system. When you spout nonsense like this, Adam, it makes it very difficult for me to believe that you were ever involved in a crime in your life in which you were not the perpetrator. If you had ever been victimized to the extent that SPSS customers and Chris Duane had been victimized by Rob Gray and Mulligan Mint, I suspect you would feel differently. Furthermore, you're being contradictory again. Don't you have a driver's license? Don't you live in Washington, D.C.? Don't you drive on government roads and use government water and monopolize electricity and monopolize telecommunication lines? What's the difference between using any of those things and using the monopoly court system? The answer, of course, is, wait for it, nothing. 10. Your use of the phrase, quote, snitches get stitches doesn't quite apply, is clearly a veiled threat, passive-aggressive, and again, indicative of a borderline personality disorder. 11. Your numerous contradictions can only be caused by one of two things. Either A, you recognize you are being completely contradictory, in which case you are a hypocrite and a liar, or B, you fail to realize that you're being completely contradictory, in which case you are a schizophrenic. Given the fact that we have already established that you have a borderline personality disorder, I'm going to have to conclude that you, like the vast majority of the world, are deranged and in need of therapy. Hopefully this dose of sanity will be a gentle nudge along the path towards higher consciousness and mental health. 12. The final point. The actions of you, Rob Gray, and Mulligan Mint have been absolutely despicable. You have brought shame on the entire bullion industry and the entire libertarian community. What I find most abhorrent, however, is your threat that Mulligan Mint is going to start counterfeiting Silver Bullet Silver Shield rounds on May 15th. SPSS customers have displayed an enormous amount of patience and generosity in dealing with Mulligan Mint. And for you to repay that kindness with treachery is an atrocity that eclipses any crime ever committed by Obama. If you proceed in this course of action, you are not only ripping off Chris Duane, you are ripping off anyone who bought SPSS rounds either from Mulligan Mint or a third party. It might be wiser for both you and Rob Gray to keep your terrorist threats well sealed behind your lips unless you want to get slapped with a subpoena for all your records in a class action lawsuit. It also behooves you to remember that the type of counterfeiting that you are threatening is not just an act of fraud. It is an act of war. I know, Adam, that in your vain, megalomaniacal fantasies that you are God's gift to everything and a tough guy soldier. But if you proceed in this course of action, you're going to find out the hard way what real strength looks like as it comes crashing down on your head. If I were you, or Rob Gray, I would exercise extreme caution in deciding who you victimize next. You might call up something that you will not be able to put down. Postscript. It's never too late to apologize and do the right thing.